Saturday, July 13th, 2024. Welcome to another episode of the DePIN Report. Today we have Michael from WhoLovesBurrito with us. I've left his Twitter and website in the description of both streams. We're streaming this from both my channel and Brad's. So go ahead, give him a follow on Twitter and take a look at his website. He does tremendous research on all DePIN projects. Michael, thank you for being here with us.
Yeah, man. Happy to be here.
Brad, thanks for joining as well, as always.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me on. Glad it worked out with the timing and everything.
Yeah, I try not to schedule these streams when there are other large live streams going on. Obviously, Misfit Miners right now, but we'll probably repost this as a video as well. I think there's going to be enough substantive information in this between the three of us to, make it worthwhile for the audience and give them some perspective at what we're looking at. And, Michael, I do want to talk about your rating system, how you grade projects, and really what you've come to. I don't have the word for it. I guess what you've come to observe in the DePIN space. So, you want to give us a little background on yourself to start off?
Yeah, sure. I am the owner and proprietor of WhoLovesBurrito website, which you mentioned there. I'll give a little background history of myself. I'm not known as a blockchain expert in any way. It's not how I came to be a part of the kind of the DePIN community. I actually was just kind of interested. My first foray into cryptocurrency was having a old Antminer L3 Plus to mine some Litecoin and Dogecoin, and I thought that was really cool. I bought it off some guy on the internet or whatever, and just kind of fiddled around with it, and started going from there. I'm like, oh, let's get a Bitcoin miner going and a few other things, and then around that time, Helium was really taking off, whatever it was, $40 a token, and everyone was paying thousands of dollars for these little Raspberry Pis repackaged with an antenna on it. And I thought that was actually an interesting thing. And although Helium was kind of my first foray into DePIN and opening or having some hardware, I was actually really interested in PlanetWatch, which now, of course, PlanetWatch tokens aren't worth very much, but the idea of a decentralized network of environmental sensors is really interesting to me because I'm by education an environmental engineer. So I spent a lot of time collecting environmental data when I was in grad school. So this all came together, and just kind of hobbyist, and thought, well, what would be a cool thing to do? Let's learn how to do websites, HTML, and so what should I do? And I had been growing this list of DePIN projects. I think my first list was, between 15 and 20 projects. Helium, PlanetWatch, a few others that were early. This was before the term DePIN really even existed. And I created this website. I tried to run it on Flux because I wanted to full on decentralize. That did not go well. The WordPress on Flux was not really ready yet, and it kept failing. But eventually got to a place where I have a stable website. And so now, like you said, I do research, try to aggregate projects onto the site for people to use. It's all free. Anyone wants to go there and see what's new, get some information on DePIN projects, they can do that. I don't expect anything other than that. So just try to keep that updated. And as you mentioned, try to do research and do some scoring, some other just things of interest. That's kind of where it is.
And I know that you've told this to about every other show, every time you're on a Twitter space, you're asked. But let us know again how you came up with the name WhoLovesBurrito.
I knew that was going to be the follow-up. It's a bit of an absurd name, but it does have a background. I was young, much younger than I am today. I like t-shirts, as you may have noticed already. I was wearing a DePIN t-shirt. But I was younger. I was really into these t-shirt. People have t-shirts when they're in college. And I found this t-shirt just randomly, and it said, "Who loves burrito?" on it. And it had a motorbike on it and the words "Who love burrito?" And that makes literally no sense at all. It's not burritos, "Who loves burritos?" which would make a lot of sense, maybe at least. It was "Who loves burrito?" and had this motorcycle on it, and just was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. So I bought it, of course. I'm like, I'm just gonna wear this around. And so for years I wore this t-shirt around. And the thing about this absurdity is that that shirt started any number of conversations. Girls, guys, doesn't matter. Everyone was interested in why I was wearing a shirt that said "Who loves burrito?" and had a bike on it. And so it worked out in a lot of ways. And it's funny because I was just looking at a picture of my wife and I from many years ago, and I was wearing the t-shirt. So I just saw it and I'm like, oh, there it is. And so I don't own that t-shirt anymore, but every place I go now, everyone's like, "Where's the t-shirt?" Because I was wearing it so much. All my friends ask about it. But the real thing is, like, when naming a business or a website or anything else, my theory is, and I may be wrong about this, I'm not a professional advertiser or marketer, is like, don't let your name define you, right? Define your name so that people know me as having a website dedicated to DePIN projects and research. They say, well, that's what Who Loves Burrito is about, not my name is something else. And they automatically assume what it is I'm doing. And they may be wrong about that because assumptions get you in trouble. So this way I can change gears if I decide I no longer want to do DePIN, or I want to add DeSci or DeFi and start expanding out. It doesn't matter what my name is. I'm Who Loves Burrito, and I get to do fun puns around Who Loves Burrito and have a funny icon that's a burrito, and it's just kind of funny. So that's the story.
So, can you go over a little bit about the grading criteria or the scoring criteria for the projects that you speak to on your website, and really how do you come across these projects, and when do you decide if it's time to put them on the website after maybe you vetted them, maybe you haven't, and what criteria you look at in particular?
Yeah, that's a good question about vetting. So maybe I'll start there. My objective to get them on the site is to be the fastest to list them. That can burn you sometimes. So anyone going to the site, please note, vetting may not happen immediately. Basically, look at the projects and decide whether they meet the definition of DePIN that I have on my site. You can see that.
I believe you disclose that you say, here's one, but we've not looked at it. This is not an endorsement. It's not been scored. Is that
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. I mean, there's been scam projects on the database before. Obviously, I take them off as soon as they're discovered to be a scam. But try to provide as much information about them as possible so someone could research them themselves. But some scams are very good, right, and fool very smart people for some amount of time. So it's impossible to really tell until the project gets going. So
not all of them start off with the intention of being a scam as well.
This is true too. So I'm always on the lookout. And in fact, other people can earn Who Loves Burrito tokens by submitting projects to the database. So just so you know, it's just the idea of the token I can explain later, but it's really a utility token with a dream about how I'm going to handle the website and the database in the future. But so a project goes on to the site pretty much immediately as soon as we find it and it meets the criteria for being a DePIN. After that, in terms of scoring, really what I'm doing in terms of my scoring is not currently, I have an idea about this, but like a methodical, every project gets scored with a very deep scientific rigor. Have had plans for that, and it can be done, but to be honest, most people didn't really care about that, is what I found out pretty quickly. And so when I participate in a project, which I participate in over 20 of the projects that are on my site, I think it may be getting close to 30 now. So I will run those projects for a while. I'll install the hardware if there's hardware to be installed, and then use that experience to give them some very basic scores. Like I think one of them is like ease of installation or ease of technical knowledge. I mean, am I going to fall off my roof, trying to put this thing up at 100 feet high? Is it something I just plug in to my internet and I'm done with it? So it's like that rating. There's then like, is there any maintenance required? So like long term, do I need to go up to this device and clean it out? Do I need to watch it all the time because it tends to fail periodically for whatever reason, software problems, hardware problems? Then what's the value, right? So obviously value changes, but the way I look at it is how hard was it to install and maintain versus how much I earn in terms of tokens and the token value. And so to try to come up with a generalized score, is it going to be really easy to install and you make a lot of tokens that are worth a lot, then you get a high value score, right? I just plug it in and do nothing and I make a bunch of money. That's about as good as you can get. Or did I have to climb up 100 feet, rewire my entire house? I have to watch it every second because it fails and I make nothing, which I can name some projects that are kind of like that. But then the value is very low, right? So,
and you grade it like this because this is really what the audience, the larger community desires, is to know specifically, is this, what's my ROI look like short term, potentially long term, and how hard is it for me to participate?
Yeah, I mean,
I remember you crowdsourced, you sent out a poll. Everyone said, what do you prioritize?
Yeah, and as you might expect, 99% of them said, well, I just want to make money. And so, some people say, I'm in it for the science of the hardware and this and that. But when it comes down to, I mean, these are projects in which people are expecting a return and earning based on the service they provide, right? That's the point of a DePIN, is the service side is coming from individuals. Anyone can participate, right? The permissions are open. But in the end, what people really care about is, well, how many tokens am I going to make and what are those tokens worth? And when that starts to fail, when the token price drops or you don't make as many tokens you used to, I mean, people get really mad. And you see this in the Discord and on X or whatever. Yeah, that's the sign.
So are you pulling live pricing data? Because obviously the prices are shifting all the time. So are you guys updating live, or are you just updating like every so often, or like daily, or how are you doing that?
Right now, it's daily to keep costs down. There are a lot of free APIs to call for pricing. As long as you don't call them too often, I could probably increase that and still say okay. But yeah, we get daily prices. We also pull a few other APIs into the database to try to keep things up to date, including when it's available. If there's data available about how many tokens on average are made in each project, I'll pull that in to try to give a good estimate for people about how much you might earn in those projects. Ultimately, the most popular thing on the website is the payback ranking, right? Which tells you how can you get your payback most quickly, right? If you buy this hardware at this price and you start earning, how long will it take you to make that money back?
Sure.
So
do you have a whole team? Because by the way, for anyone that's watching, like, you should definitely check out the website, because there are a lot of projects on here. I mean, there's a lot of good data on here. So I assume you have to have a team you're working with, right? You can't be doing this all yourself.
Yeah, it's me, my dog, and no, that's it. It's just me. So one of the things, obviously, this was started as it's free. There's no revenues really generated. I sell some T-shirts, but I mean, it takes a lot of T-shirt sales to whatever the margin is on a t-shirt or anything else. And so I do have some people who will donate from time to time, or I help them out in terms of providing data to them, and in return I get a little bit. But there's no revenue generated by the site. There's just enough to basically pay for hosting fees, and people have been nice enough to offer a few things here or there. So the idea being, number one, it's just me right now. If it were to ever get bigger or get useful or generate revenues, that's the purpose of the token, because I want to stick to I'm trying to be decentralized and using cryptocurrency, that the WLB WhoLovesBurrito token will help fund the site. In exchange for that, anyone who owns the tokens will be ultimately involved in the governance and the choices that are made on the site, and hopefully be more of a crowd-sourced ownership as well through that utility token. And that, although I can still or may still be involved, that those things kind of happen natively. And then again, by offering tokens in return for things like, if you hear of a new project and you add it in, and so for us to look at and vet and add, then you get paid in those same tokens, to hopefully incentivize people to help keep it up to date and add new projects, and all that should be the flywheel, as they say in DePIN, right? Should be get going and keep it up to date. And then the plan, ultimately, any extra revenues would be burned. Tokens would be burned to cover that revenue, to help prop up the value of the token, again, in the flywheel. But right now, it's really just keeping the site up is all we do at the moment.
So one of the interesting conversations we had when we met up was around Planet Watch, and you said in the beginning you took interest in that. You want to give us some information on what piqued your interest, and then when further researching and becoming familiar with that project, what are some of your findings, the pros and cons, and why it really didn't pan out? Because I know a lot of people have, they all wonder, like, whatever happened to Planet Watch, other than they scream it rugged. Really not, I don't know all the details to it, but that is something I'm curious about.
Yeah, I think like a lot of things, I mean, this isn't to be detrimental about Planet Watch or any project. Like a restaurant, there's so many factors that play about whether a project or a restaurant becomes successful. And it's beyond just whether they have good food. Like, I've had lots of restaurants near me that I really liked, that had really good food, and they close. For a lot of things can happen as business is poorly run. No one else likes their food. All these things that I thought, I would have predicted this restaurant's going to blow up. All projects are kind of the same way. For Planet Watch, again, I was interested because of environmental engineering, and I actually set up a lot of environmental sensors in my life. So I thought it was just interesting to basically crowdsource this sensor network. That was a good idea in theory about making hyper localized environmental sampling, so to really help those who work in that area, whether it be governments or researchers or even people who are concerned about air quality or wherever it may be, would have this to be able to either model it or get it directly. But I think, like many things, the value of that data at the time was probably overvalued. I guess it's the most political or best way to put it. That this is around the same time that helium was, again, at $40 a token or whatever, and Planet Watches was way over what probably anyone would pay for data sales for environmental data. And they were selling licenses, and they still do. All now, they've been bought by Ambient. I think the licensing is going away, but the data is probably not as valuable as what the token price was, right? Environmental data, there's lots of environmental sensors already. Governments put them out. You don't pay anything for that data. You can get it for free. It's not super localized. Like, even locally here, there's only so many sensors, just a few, but modeling's pretty good, so you don't need that many sensors. But so in indoor environmental data, I mean, without context, is probably worth close to nothing, to be honest. And so, like, and they're not selling anything. So the speculative idea about how much planets will be worth, just when it cratered back to its real value. Like I said before, people get mad, right? They spent thousands of dollars on sensors, potentially, and licenses, and now make nothing. I mean, it's literally worth almost zero. Someone I talk to regularly, he's like, oh, he has over 500,000 planets, and I think it's a couple $100 is what it's worth. So probably not worth all the money put in.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, well, that project specifically, right? Because it was environmentally minded. Now you have all this equipment that, you know, I think it is going to be repurposed, right? There's another project I think that you mentioned. I listened to a podcast about it where they're going to try to give these people a route to use that equipment or repurpose it for another project, which is cool. But to what you said, though, I think that's a big problem with a lot of these DePIN projects. I mean, the revenue side of it, right? I mean, we haven't yet seen. I mean, we're starting to see some generate revenue for sure. So far, though, DePIN, we've proven that you can get the supply side, right? By giving people tokens. You can absolutely scale networks. And I think it's going to be interesting to see which ones can turn on the revenue. And I am curious, like, which projects, I mean, you obviously are involved with a lot of them, but which projects are you most excited about, or do you think are going to actually like get that flywheel going, get the revenue through the door? And what do you think which ones do you think would be successful?
Let me preface this. I am a terrible predictor. And so I was thinking about this earlier because the ideas that I might like or think are interesting are like, feel like, oh my gosh, that's genius. Like, there's got to be a market for this. And I'll give an example. So I was a big proponent. My prediction was these two projects actually that had very similar ways they work is Illumicate and 2Blocks. These were projects where you basically had AI-based cameras, which there's cameras everywhere anyway, but you would deploy cameras that were facing like streets, into wildlife, like places where traffic would be. So like traffic can be car traffic, can be people traffic, animal traffic, whatever. I thought that's genius because there's already a market for that. There's governments pay somebody to go out and do traffic monitoring, right? Those pneumatic tubes on the ground, you ever run over those? That's counting cars running over them. Very simplistic one, but I was like, oh, this is like, there's a market, got to be a market for this. Advertisers who care about foot traffic and all this. Long story short, both those projects are done. They have shut down, which tells you how good a predictor I am of that. But every project in DePIN faces the cold start problem. Right, you have to basically, in order to sell something, you have to have something to sell, and of course, to have something to sell, you have to bootstrap and get the network out there. And so, how do you do that? And that was part of the problem with Illumicate. Like, they were trying to sell to governments their project, and the government says, "Yeah, that sounds great. Call me back when the network is ready." Well, there's no money. Like, what money do you use to deploy the network? And so you have tokens and you have speculation around the value of the tokens, but that won't only last so long, right? You have to quickly get the network out quick enough that you can then sell what you sold to someone, right? And say, oh, now it's ready and you can use it. But if you miss and run out of runway, your token becomes worthless or less than you can't make any money. No one wants to deploy the sensors anymore, and there's nothing to sell.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And some of it is just timing with the market, which you can't really control too, right? But I agree. I mean, obviously looking at the potential market, but then also like really looking at the team and whether they can execute, because they have to be able to think on both okay, the supply side, understanding the crypto side, getting this stuff deployed, and then also having a sales mindset of getting it sold, right? And getting people to use these networks. So it's a complex, all these projects are very complex, right? But do you have any projects that you're like super excited about right now? I mean, we're not going to hold your feet to the fire here if they don't.
I know. I feel bad. So I'll say a couple things first. One is I already said that I'm a terrible predictor. So not financial advice like everyone says, even if I mention a name. The other thing is WhoLovesBurrito as a site is 100% neutral, meaning that I don't have any outside influences when I put a project on or give it a rating or even mention it. It's because of our interests. We're not paid by anyone. We don't take money from projects to move them to the top of the list or whatever. And I try to keep that together and that not to be influenced and stuff like that. So other aggregators, usually started by a project or might have leave someone off because they have their own business interests, but I try not to do that. So I also try not to promote one specific project over another. But I do have projects that I'm particularly personally interested in, and that's what I can say. I'm a sensor guy, as mentioned. So I like sensor projects, like having an antenna or a sensor deployed. And one of my most recent deployments was for Neuron. You guys know Neuron?
No,
So
I have not.
you may have heard of Wingbits, maybe, which is somewhat similar. So Neuron is somewhat like Wingbits, which is using ADSB and MLAT and FLARM to basically provide tracking for ultimately what they want to do is drone traffic. So basically low to the ground aerial traffic. And so they're deploying sensors like Wingbits. You have a couple of different antennas that are associated, and they present that onto a site called 4D Sky. So if anyone's listening and wants to check that out, go to 4D Sky. It's really cool. So you can sign up for a free account and you can see all the planes moving. Right now, what you see is like commercial airliners, which is typical for ADSB, but ultimately what they want to sell and already have revenues, which is, again, I think the big differentiator is these projects that start out with some revenue already with what they're doing. GeoNet is another good example of that. Like they have customers, right, who buy their services already, which really helps with the cold start problem, right? So this Neuron already has clients, have been presenting to government agencies and others who are interested in this data, drone operators and stuff, and have real interest from them in the product. And so I think that's probably what's going to make them successful, right? Because they don't need to, they're still going to sell. They still need to be out there selling and getting data customers, but they already have some. So they're not in a dire situation where if they don't get a customer, the value goes down and all that. So I would say they're what I'm most interested in now because they just deployed something for them in their beta. And it's really cool project, I think.
One of the interesting points that you made when we spoke when I was out in Portland, you said that there some entities, municipalities, governments, they're not necessarily interested in the most accurate of data, or they prefer to have their data sets received in a way that they can massage. I think it was a phrase you used.
Yeah. I heard this directly from one of those failed projects, Illumicate, who was obviously trying to sell the project because it's traffic and like that seems like governments are like an instantaneous customer for like traffic data, and those city planners and stuff already get traffic data. They pay someone for that. So this made a lot of sense. And what Illumicate said when they talked to governments was the government was like, yeah, that's great. Your data is super accurate. Too accurate, meaning it's too good, and it might not tell us what we want it to tell us, right? So governments want to get funding, and they really need the data to say what they already have told people, and so they don't want the data to be that great. They want the data to be Yeah, so massageable, I guess you will,
Flexible.
or flexible enough, yeah, so they can make the argument they're trying to make. In having super accurate data does not suit them, which I found very disheartening, disappointing, but maybe not too surprising in the end. But for these projects who are really trying to, like, do the right thing, like produce good, accurate data, which a lot of these sensor projects, that's what it's about, right? Localized, accurate information on the weather or environmental pollution or traffic or whatever. Some people don't want it. They want something less accurate to use for their own purposes. So yeah, it's a little.
But you believe like the economic incentive or the market is there for sensor data on a mass scale. You believe that this is feasible, at least with some of the projects that we're seeing.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, and to be honest, there's always been initiatives for what I call, I wouldn't call it, they didn't call it decentralized, it would be more like distributed. So like distributed computing, distributed sensor networks have always been there. A lot of them are volunteer. So there's a weather network that's all volunteer. The current flight tracking for like FlightAware and some of those other apps, a lot of that comes from volunteers who provide their data for no return.
Yeah.
And so I think this whole idea of like these decentralized or distributed networks that are hyperlocal is a really good idea, and having an incentive so they can earn for that data they provide is also good overall to make it reliable and consistent. And so I do believe in the idea of it, but like anything else, we're early. There's going to be lots of failures. So people have to really work at finding the exact business model, if you will, that works best for their particular niche. And so there's going to be a lot of projects to fail. I'm going to turn this around on you guys a little bit too. I'm interested in what projects you guys think are, I don't know, say the hot project. What interests you in terms of new projects?
You want to take that, Brad?
Sure, man. So just similar to you, I got in with helium. So, that's how I got into DePIN, at least. I had taken some blockchain courses and found crypto super interesting, and then started going down rabbit holes and then spending like hours every day now for like years. But yeah, so I still have some IoT hotspots deployed. I think I got up to like 70 hotspots on rooftops deployed, and then I started looking at other projects. So Hive Mapper, I have a lot of content on my channel about Hive Mapper. So I've got about 100 dash cams in my fleet with delivery drivers, Uber drivers, etc. They made some changes recently to slash rewards, but it is what it is. Like, I think they are focused on the right things. I think they are focused on getting customers, getting better data with the new model. So I think they're kind of pivoting to that new model and pushing that project forward. I think it can do well if they can execute. Demo, I like a lot. So I've got about 250 vehicles in my fleet on Demo, and I love their team. They are constantly building. They started building through the bear market. They're very dedicated, and they're at all the events. And I like that project because I think there's a lot of ways they can go with telematics data. So I'm a huge fan of that project. GeoNet's another one, very big fan of. They've got revenue coming through the door. Their unlocks for employees are tied to different milestones. I don't have any units deployed, but I do personally have a substantial position in that project. And I met Mike when I was out at Consensus, super smart guy. So I really like their project. And then from like a cloud, decentralized cloud storage, I really like Arweave. They're building a lot. I like what that project's doing, and they're getting a lot of usage. And then compute, I think everyone's on Render. I like Render a lot. They're kind of the big name, and I like Nasana. I like Nasana a lot too. I think that space, the cloud compute in particular, is going to be a little bit of a bubble. You see, there are some projects that have popped up with huge market caps that just did a really good job in marketing. The ones that are really, really building are the ones I'm interested in. And there are some really good projects. Exhibits is another one that hasn't launched a token that I think they're doing some really good things too. So those are really the main projects that I have my positions in, that I think there's a market to target as far as revenue goes, right? They've set it up well that they're getting growth in the network on the supply side, and there's enough supply available to get meaningful data. And then the team can execute on the back end. I mean, those are the really the things you need to pull it all together. And then obviously, the tokenomics are a factor as well, if they have solid tokenomics. But those are the projects I'm most interested in for this market cycle for sure.
It's funny, it's interesting about that. Most of the Hive Mapper, GeoNet, Demo, those always are at the top of the rankings for payback. I mean, that kind of goes hand in hand, right? That the successful projects are the ones you want to be involved with. And then my other note was compute is. I used to be no compute projects in the database, and now they by far dominate the category because there's no hardware deployment. So it's like, well, I'll just create this compute project and like do distributed computing, which has been around for since the 70s, basically. So
for sure. And I do have I think I have 4 Weather XM stations deployed as well. I think there's a path to revenue there. I don't know. I'm not as convinced that the revenue's there with some of the other projects, but I do like what they're doing. I think it's super cool that they're getting weather data in a decentralized way. Like you can get a lot more precise weather data for, in a given location. I like that. And I do have a background in renewables too. So I worked in solar for like 16 years, man. So, so I like, so it's not just obviously I like to break it down from a business perspective, but I do like the whole thought of DePIN in general. It's a way to crowdsource participation. And, people can kind of feel ownership in something, which is, I think, pretty cool. And then for me, it's been like rewarding because I built out these fleets and I brought a lot of people into crypto that never would have been in crypto without them having to put any skin in the game, really. Right. So I'm giving, I'm paying for the equipment and getting them involved. So that's been pretty cool too.
How about you, Joe?
Yeah, pretty much the same that was named, Hive Mapper. I don't have a demo. I wouldn't hook one up to my car, but the whole project makes sense. There's certainly shipping, producing on their promises and their product. GeoNet actually just got one in today, so I'm going to set that up. And there's a few others there. Crank. I know there's a lot of skepticism around that after the whole helium debacle, and the team has made good on their promises. They've been completely solid this whole time. And they have a couple more features that they'll be releasing. I think they're going to have a lot of diversification in their platform. A lot of different, as you can see, they're doing like software licenses for, you can just spin up any project using your Raspberry Pi or really any single board computer that's supported, and add sensors or add storage to it, and you can participate in other networks, mine on those as well. We'll see if XNet pulls through. I hope they do. I really hope they do, because if you have numerous crypto projects who have tried and failed on one concept, even though we believe that it can work, that really brings the space to a crawl for that particular sector of DePIN, which I believe some of these ideas, like the Wi-Fi offload for telecom companies, that could be a thing. If they fail to land, if both them, Helium, and all the other players in the game, there's a few others. I'd have to pull the names up, but if everyone fails to accomplish that, that really sours any deals going forward with the big carriers. And for the community, they're less likely to participate and take that gamble on setting up infrastructure, buying the hardware, because they've seen it fail too many times in the past.
Yeah, that's I saw in the chat someone mentioned Spexy, which I think not related to the telecom, but in terms of like projects who seem to have value, are the ones that deal with imagery, right? So Hive Mapper is a good example. Natix. I thought Illumicate in $2 because it's really about imagery and identification. That Spexy also seems like a good idea if it works. Basically, paying people for drone imagery, and you have all these people with drones now and are collecting a ton of data that would be useful, for people to have of overviews of different sites and stuff like that. I think those kinds of projects some of them are bound to be successful, because I think there would be a market for that type of imagery. But
I really like the idea of BirdBot. Not bird bite, BirdBot. Oh, that was pretty cool.
I have a soft place for bird. I wish they still existed. Last time I posted about them, which was months and months ago, they said they're still they're still there working. Obviously the project is kind of dead, but what a interesting idea.
I don't know. You could probably get some people to. You could probably just stream all that data, and there would be enthusiasts who would log on. Be like, oh, we spotted the rare raven or whatever out here, and
bird watching is huge. Like there are so many people who do bird watching. Like it's a pretty large community. Like I can imagine there'd be some people interested in that BirdBot data, but it's probably not gonna be worth a ton. You're not getting rich running the BirdBot.
My cats love watching bird TV, so you could probably throw in a few ads there at the beginning and make some money off of that. But you gotta be creative with it. I don't know. We got a comment from Russ.
Oh, hey Russ.
Any thoughts on Chirp?
I don't have any because I'm not involved. I watched them since they came around. I don't know anyone. No one in my circle really runs a hotspot, if you will, for Chirp. So I'm curious if you guys have any insight into that either. The price was relatively high for the device, and there's no return currently, and so it's all speculative. I don't know whether another device of that nature is bound to be any more successful than the ones that currently exist, but I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts.
Same thoughts. I'm kind of over the whole proprietary hardware sort of gig, unless they provide very a real good reason as to why you need proprietary hardware. And like in the instance of Hive Mapper, right? It makes sense. Like there is certainly a quality assurance need for having this hardware, and what features the dash cams provide or will provide in the case of the B. With Chirp, it's not really there, and there's plenty of other LoRaWAN projects in the space as we've seen. I hear that the network works good. I hear the data transfer is very well constructed, but I've not seen anything that, and I haven't looked at it in a while, disclaimer, but in the beginning I hadn't really seen anything that differentiated it. The team certainly looked like they had impressive backgrounds and credentials, but it seemed like at that time they're considering riding multiple horses at once, which it's hard to do especially when you're a startup.
Yeah, might get overly complex, which is has become a problem for some. Just trying to chase too many things at once. It's hard. Yeah, I'm curious how it turns out. It used to be, as you know, with helium, you could put up a single device and maybe make some decent money. And some projects you can still do okay in the short term. But as people ask me, I was like, oh, should I get into these deep end projects? And I was like, well, first of all, none of these projects as an individual is going to make you rich. This is number one. It's not going to happen. That old helium days are gone. But you can make a consistent return if you're patient and you put up the device, or you can choose to scale. You can make a little on hundreds of devices, and that becomes big, right? So if your business is around deploying fleets, as Brad, you mentioned, you have fleets. That makes a ton more sense when you have that type of volume. You can withstand small or even large changes in token values for a while. You've got a long-term plan. It's not about putting one device on top of your house and thinking you're going to make thousands of dollars. It's just not going to happen. Unless it's a scam project and you're at the top of the pyramid for a little while.
Yeah. If you get in, I mean, a lot of times if you get in early and you take on the risk early on before a project's established, but it's amazing how quickly the sentiment changes. I mean, back in the spring when things were going up pretty steadily there for a minute, especially in the DePIN space. I mean, everybody was incredibly bullish on all these projects, and then in snap of a finger, the market corrects and everyone's bearish. It's amazing. And just being on X, seeing the change in sentiment from day to day, it's just crazy in this space. But
well, I think that also, there's people sometimes miss, deploying networks using a distributed nature or decentralized nature. A lot of times you are distributing one person at a time. There are a few like yourselves that have fleets and are running businesses off this, but a lot of times it's a single person. And there are a lot of social dynamics that go into incentivizing people to do things that you want, and then what happens when you lose incentive, and what happens when people lose I'll say initiative. And so there's some interesting research studies about how much do you have to give somebody to get what you want, but not give too much. But then there's also a point where if you start giving too much, you actually get less quality data. It's an interesting study. And so you got to really find the sweet spot, if you will, to keep people deploying and interested, but not either pissing them off or overpaying in them. And so you get bad data.
But to your point, if the payment's too much, people are going to try to find a way to game the system. But it's so difficult to find that perfect balance, because you're in a market that is constantly fluctuating. You can fluctuate in a big way. So it's really difficult to find that correct balance, right? I mean, some projects are doing a better job than others, but I don't know. My thing is, I just find the ones I believe in the most. I build out in them, and I just stack tokens. I'm not looking at it as a thing that I'm going to cash out weekly to pay my bills, and we'll see where it goes.
So I found a new project today, and I did put a post on X about it. Since you have car fleets and Uber drivers and such, I don't know anything about this project. The devices are pre-sale, but it's called Invida, basically short for environmental data. And they're deploying a few different type of sensors: an environmental sensor, basically an imagery, basically a camera, and something else. I can't remember what it was. Kind of like a demo, car data thing, I think. Which I think those type of projects are easy to deploy in fleets and make a lot of sense for crowdsourcing that data. I think it's a European company, so maybe probably starting there, but might be something worth looking into. all the projects moving to Solana. I have no. I am not a blockchain expert. I know enough to get myself in trouble. So it's true, though. I mean, you see a lot of DePIN projects. I mean, by far, if you look at our database, the majority of projects are still basically Ethereum token projects because a lot of the compute projects are Ethereum. But if you look at like sensor and hardware projects, a good portion of them are on Solana, and maybe that has something to do with it. But I don't know enough about the intricacies of it to
I
say.
would say there's probably 3 particular reasons for that. First one being liquidity pools. Liquidity pools on Solana just tend to be of much more significance than anywhere else. Of course, gas fees and transactions per second, low gas fees, high transactions per second. That's what you get with Solana. And the smart contracts are based in Rust. So something like ERC20 Solidity, although it looks like JavaScript and it's still constructed fairly similar manner to most very common languages, it's not as flexible. It's really made for smart contracts, and there is not as big of an ecosystem of developers that can be just hired right out of an interview and start understanding how to deploy it. Rust, you have a much larger ecosystem overall, and it's much more flexible. You have a lot more options, which they can be dangerous with smart contracts, but doing some of these on-chain calculations, you can get very fancy and complex with that. So overall, those are the primary reasons, in my opinion.
That makes sense. I wonder, and full disclosure, the WhoLovesBurrito token is on Solana, so it's actually a pretty easy process for token deployment too. So that's obviously has, like you said, the language is pretty easy for that kind of stuff. So that can have something to do with it too. But I'm wondering, these DePIN dedicated chains like IOTEX and Peak. I wonder what the difference. I'm guessing it's what you said about liquidity is probably the bigger driver to keep people on Solana rather than those dedicated chains. But I'm curious if you guys thought about that at all either.
I haven't looked close enough at it. Go ahead, Brad.
No, I've looked at it. Like, I think a lot of people also go to Solana because there's a lot of people in the crypto space using Solana. So it's a lot easier to get people onboarded into your project if they're using a chain that's already being utilized. It also gets you a lot more exposure being on Solana. Like, I think we've seen this with like GeoNet and Demo are on Polygon, and then you have HiveMap around Solana. And I think the Solana based projects, at least this year, have gotten a lot more exposure and have had better price action, generally speaking. As far as which one to build on, I don't think it so much matters as far as I'm concerned. As long as the project has legs and they can get revenue through the door and build and has a team, you can always move from one blockchain to another. But as far as like the Peak and IOTEX, those are really interesting to me in the sense that I think they get more support. So if you're building on those blockchains, you get a lot more support in getting your project off the ground, and they really specialize in DePIN. So I'm starting to dig into Peak right now, and I think IOTEX started off more so like with sensor deployments, and then they've kind of branched out into some other stuff too. But I definitely find it interesting. I just wonder, because they are kind of their own blockchain, will that prevent them from onboarding as much as they could like on Solana? I don't know.
Maybe I did notice, and I don't know whether this is because Peak is not really technically launched. You can't launch a token on Peak. I've seen a couple projects commit to Peak and then uncommit to Peak and go to Solana, probably from a readiness perspective is my guess, but I don't really know.
Yeah, it's hard to, if one of the main components of your project is the blockchain, well, in all cases it is, and you're looking at something that is proven for all the faults that people name with Solana in the in the grander scheme, it's the issue that they're having in the beginning is pretty minor. But are you going to look at some that you have to choose one on one hand that's going to give you a grant and is promising to have special features to support your integration, or do you go with the elephant in the room that will have dedicated support to work with? They're not going to give you a grant necessarily, but it's proven, and just so the overall, a large amount of economy, economic transactions. Look, there's just a lot of people using Solana, and that benefits everyone there because money is circulating, crypto is circulating, and the community, they're generally interested to see who's building what on their chain, so it draws some traction. Those are the biggest factors I've seen that it comes down to, really, in most cases. Like, are the brand new projects going to take the grant and some new blockchain's native layer 1 token or coin, which could be worth a decent amount, maybe not, or are they going to build somewhere that has tried and true method and all the big players are in?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. Again, I'm pretty agnostic about the chain. I don't push one over the other. I'm trying to stay neutral about it too. But yeah, it's doesn't really matter for my purposes which chain it is.
And then when you get someone onboarded to a new, like, okay, so let's say something's on Polygon or Solana. Most of us have MetaMask or Phantom wallets, or at least something that supports those, one or both. They're fairly well known. I mean, if you're doing transactions on Polygon with a wallet, generally you can do transactions on Ethereum and most other ERC20 based networks, that same wallet. So you're, for an individual, it's not too hard to manage, and they're already familiar with it. That not having those types of hurdles for users is a big deal, is what I'm coming to find when I'm assisting people in these communities. When they have to onboard with a new wallet, and that coin, the layer 1, Coinbase might not support it, Binance might not support it. If they don't support the layer 1 chain, chances are it's going to be a long time before they support the actual token, and you get
off ramp it, as they say, to fiat.
Not being able to do it directly, and then you have to go through, like, you have to jump through hoops to exchange it in a way that will find value. Where, like, something, if it's already built on Solana, Polygon, Ethereum, and most of the other ERC20s, if the layer 1 blockchain of your project is supported on Coinbase or Binance, which most cases is, when it comes to Solana, Polygon, one of the ones I'm finding, Cadena, it's not supported by a lot of these large ones. So what a pain in the butt it is to get money out of there. But
how many steps does it take to actually get to selling a token somewhere? Like,
for what I would do, I think it's like 5. And at every point, it's there's a few points you're just like, is this transaction going to go through? Is today the day I lose $100 on a failed transaction? But it's it's and the ease of the use of the blockchain is another massive one. Onboarding crank gateways, it has not been the easiest of things to do and understand, because you have 20 chains there, and I was surprised to see, crank kind of prove that the throughput of one chain, the transactions per second, is not necessarily what they claimed. So what I'm getting at here, I'll give you an example of when I'm moving money out of, like, crank to another chain, or even trying to cash out. You have to exchange the token for the layer 1, And if you don't have a centralized exchange that supports the layer 1, you have to go through something like I was using changenow.io. There's another one, but I don't remember off the top of my head. But it'll let you change that layer 1 for another layer 1, and the fees are usually pretty low, and you don't have to go through KYC and all that. Then you have to send that to your centralized exchange and trade it there. So yeah, it's not the easiest to do. And then,
yeah, it's something you have to bridge like 2 or 3 times to get something out. It's obviously mass adoption is not going to happen.
Oh yeah.
Until that gets sorted, right? Having 6 wallets, having to swap through 3 bridges to get your earnings out is just not going to work for anyone, really.
And another point that I was going to make a big deal for a lot of these projects is whether their token will get listed on a centralized exchange, obviously, because it brings more stability to the price. It brings more retail investment. Use that term loosely, but look, it pumps the price and it gives people an easy 2-step off ramp. You send it from your wallet to the centralized exchange, tell the centralized exchange, cash me out, and that's it. So, these other layer 1s, it's great that they're built for DePIN and all that. And I don't know what features that are provided that are so desperately needed, because it's, with everything else in engineering, you have a fine balancing mechanism and trade-offs for everything. So if you start working on some sort of smart contract that has all these complexities in it, you start to become more open for attack vectors and for bugs in general.
Yeah.
Do you necessarily need all this on chain? And one of the things is DePIN, I don't really like the term decentralized physical infrastructure networks. I think it should be distributed physical infrastructure networks, because as we're seeing, to completely build everything in a truly decentralized manner, good luck.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that. There was a conversation I had recently, I think on X, about that, because the word decentralized means different things to different people. Like, what we're really talking about with DePIN, as you mentioned, is distributed. You're basically distributing the supply side. And so in the paper we wrote about that, my example was, you remember SETI at home, which is you could leave your computer on and look for aliens in space. I don't know if you're maybe I'm showing my age, but back.
It sounds interesting.
Yeah, you could leave your computer on and you sign up for SETI, which is a government or like a nonprofit agency that basically looks for alien life. And you could contribute your computer's resources, basically compute, to the SETI project. So you leave your computer on to be running software at night, and it would use all these computers to help tabulate all this data it was getting from telescopes and stuff that are looking at space, looking for aliens. You contribute. Basically, it's distributed computing. You aren't getting paid for it as volunteer, but you could volunteer your compute resources to this project. So distributed computing has been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
Being paid for it, not so much, but yeah, it really is. And then, does decentralized mean the governance? Does it mean, is it everything permissionless? Like, there's all these things that go into that. And so the conversation I'm referencing, we talked about, should we create a decentralization index? So take all the factors, and we wrote a paper on taxonomy that kind of lays out all of the different factors that go into a project specifically for DePIN. Which of these can be decentralized, number one, and then what's it mean to be decentralized? Like, all the servers are distributed, or some of them are, or none of them are, right? So any point along these chains, you might have a continuum of how decentralized it is, from all the way decentralized, which would be pretty rare, to not decentralized at all, right? Everything's centralized. It's not really a decentralized project at all. I think that would be an interesting thing to add to a database like ours, if we could get all this worked out, so people can see that, because people do say they care about that. Like, I want to be decentralized projects. I want it to be permissionless and all these things. But the reality of businesses is some parts probably need to be centralized, at least initially, because otherwise you can't get the project off the ground. And
Yeah.
fully democratic governance just doesn't work. It doesn't work as a government, and it doesn't work in businesses either, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's the truth. And I know a lot of people want to quote the gold standard of Bitcoin, but Bitcoin is as complex as it is. It's simple enough and has a large enough ecosystem of developers and people using it to keep it decentralized and maintained in a manner that has integrity. If you're talking about building out distributed networks, it's never going to be decentralized to the point that Bitcoin is. There's just, to get everyone on the same page for that and to move in a way that is like agile, it's not happening.
Well, and it goes back to the human condition, right? You most of the time humans will act in their own self-interest. So if they're voting for something, like, you put up a vote that says you're going to make more money or less money, but if you take less money, but the project will do better long term, like 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the majority of people will choose whatever's in their best interest at the moment. And a lot of times that is not the same as the best interest of the project. And people complain about this time, but that's people. And so if you allow that sort of 100% democracy, that's what you get, right? And that's why our own government in the U.S. is not a true democracy. It's a representative democracy, because the founders knew that was a problem, and so that factions would create, even though they probably already have, even with how we're set up in the warnings. But that was a real concern and remains that way in like those type of systems. So you have to have some kind of governance that works to prevent the problems that kind of thing can create. That's probably more philosophical than we're ready to dive into on DePIN Report number 2.
No, we've discussed that pretty in depth and have sat here having intense conversations numerous nights about it, and it's I don't know. You certainly make a good point. I mean, that's spot on. And another thing there is, when it comes to governance, 90% of the people time, 90% of the time people aren't paying attention. The other 10%, they're kicking over the table and voting with their feet. That's the reality of it. So coming up with the governance is hard, but I continue to push for, in particular, like Hive Mapper. If you see, there are some on-chain metrics that are differentiators, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one vote per token or token weighted, or one vote per each piece of hardware that you own. You have fleet owner metrics. How many devices are in your fleet? How much are you currently holding? How much of the AI trainer do you do weekly, and your how many, what level are you rated at? How long have you been participating? How many unique miles that you have? And you can come in some sort of weighted system with those type of unique metrics that actually gives all stakeholders a fair play.
Yeah.
So that's something that I've been pushing for with every DePIN project on some level. Each of them has unique aspects of contribution that you can certainly apply some sort of weighted score system to the participant.
Yeah, but I think I would argue that somebody who's centralized, that is a decision maker, has to choose which of those metrics. Like, you can design and collaboratively design, but there's always going to be decisions to be made, and somebody some centralized entity has to ultimately make the decision, like we're going to go this way or that way, right? It should be 0.2 or should it be 0.3? And so you can try to get consensus, but somebody ultimately has to make the final decision. And so, yeah.
And so what I've said about, like, for example, HiveMapper for the longest time, they might put out, requests for comments on each one of their improvement proposals, but do they really give a shit what you say? Most of the time not. So
we need to give a shit index as well. So like,
yeah. So most of the time I had confidence that, they're running this in a manner that they thought was, more like a business, but in the project's best interest. And perhaps they still run it in what they believe is the project's best interest. But, Brad and I have had a lot of discussions with the team and on here as to some of the recent steps that were taken seem detrimental to the project. And like you said, people, what are they mostly concerned about? ROI. What am I making?
Did you cut my earnings today? Because that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, that's valid. And what I would like to see more of, though, is that the token unlocks for the employees and investors are aligned with the contributors' token unlocks. So if there's certain metrics that they're shifting that affect our rewards structure, like global progress on the map, for example, I feel like that global progress for the map should also have some sort of impact on their unlock schedule as well, to some extent, because then everything's aligned. I feel like otherwise there can be a conflict of interest, where they're messing with our pie, if you will, but those changes have no impact at all. In fact, you could argue if they're reducing rewards for us in a lot of different ways, you could argue they might be even creating upside for their holdings that are unaffected as such. So, like Demo, for example, just announced they're extending out token unlocks for employees and investors. GeoNet has certain milestones they have to hit. So I would like to see more projects go that route, where they at least have some milestones or some type of progress they need to hit certain unlocks, rather than just a set schedule. And a longer unlock schedule on some of these would be nice too, I think.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Like any business, right? Your early investors need to be aligned with your success of the project, right? And not be able to just dump on everybody and sell out their stocks when no one else can. That's a common complaint, not just in crypto, but just in business in general, right? With public companies and stock. So a fairness issue all around. I would agree with that. But
yeah, what are you saying that CEOs are overpaid? Yeah, right. Yeah, no, but that's exactly what I'm saying. Because if you want to tout being like decentralized or whatever, a network of the people, it's like, okay, well then, let's all kind of be in this together a little bit, I not to say that the percentages, not to say the employees or the investors shouldn't get their fair return, but I would just like to see it more aligned with the success of the project, and instead of just a 2-3 year unlock and they're like, all right, we're done.
Yeah, I graciously set up the WhoLovesBurrito token, so I get 99% and you guys get the 1%. So does that seem fair? I'm just kidding.
All right, let's pump it.
Pump it right now. Dump on all of you. Come on, do it.
Awesome. Well, hey man, I do like your website a lot. There's a lot of good data on there, and I'm impressed that you do that all by yourself. Like, that has to be a lot of work. To keep it up
yeah,
there.
I spend a good amount of time. I have young kids too, so I don't have a lot of hobby time, but I do a lot of when I'm just sitting around, do a little research and stuff like that. So I spend a little time on it. But I'm curious. Actually, I thought of this question earlier. I was wondering, you guys or anyone who might be listening, how does someone, or how do you in particular find new projects? And, what would be a value to you, say not who loves burrito right now, but if you were looking for some information, what kind of things do you look for? Like, it's just a list and I'm going to go do my research. I just want to know what's new. Is there particular information that you're interested in when you look at stuff like that?
I personally, I think would be interesting to see the TAM, like total addressable market, revenue wise for the project. I think that would be a very interesting metric, because that's one that I personally research on any project I'm going into to make sure it's viable. But I mean, you have a lot of good, you have really good data on here. For as far as like for me finding new projects, I mean, there's a lot going on X, obviously. Coin Market Cap's a good resource too, that you can sort by the different categories. And then I just go down rabbit holes. I'll go onto the website. I look at their team. I looked at their LinkedIn profiles, like freaking everything, man. And then I do the industry research to see, how big is that addressable market and how many participants do they need to move the needle. Like GeoNet, for example, their goal is to get to 100,000 base stations and they'll have global coverage. Something like Hive Mapper, they need to map the entire world and refresh it as often as they want. They need a much larger number than 100,000 mappers, right? So,
are you getting the TAM off of their own like site information they're providing publicly? Where are you getting that information?
I normally will search like industry reports. I'll go to Google and start researching whatever the project is, what the addressable market is. And I look for industry reports and try to read through and kind of figure it out myself. Because I mean, every project is, you can use that as a reference point, right?
Yeah.
But you might have some like fuzzy math in there. Like you said, like the massaging of the numbers with the gun.
Yeah, you wanted to say what you wanted to say. Or, we have $1 trillion addressable market. Sure.
Yeah. So I always try to verify, through other sources. But to me, like the TAM is huge, because if they're trying to move into a market, it's $1 million a year market. It's like, okay, how is their market cap 20 million? And they're moving into an industry where they'd have to have 100% of the total addressable market, and that's still a 20x. I mean, I think that's one of the main things I look at, is to see if it's even viable to get revenue through the door.
Yeah. That'd be an interesting ratio to put as a number too, like the current market value versus the TAM. Would give you a nice ratio to look at.
Yeah, they get overblown in crypto. I mean, in bull runs especially, you see it's not the same as like the traditional stock markets. It's so speculative. I mean, we saw that with Helium, right? I mean, Helium, obviously they did a great job of building up the network. And I think they're still growing. They're making moves, but at one point, I think it was that Lyra guy or whatever that put out that they're generating $5,000 a month in revenue. They're generating far more now, but the market cap was like $4 billion. It was a little bit out of whack. So it was more so like, hey, the network's there, now it's going to get usage. And that is one of the things with DePIN is that, it is speculative to the extent. I mean, crypto in general, this is an emerging technology, and we're betting that, hey, the foundation's being put down for this stuff that's going to get utilized in the future. It's getting utilization now, but it'll get far more down the road, and we're early to this type of deal. But I think with DePIN, we're seeing so many of these projects pop up. I would bet that 10-15% are here in the next market cycle. If not less, right? A lot of them are going to fail.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to do my due diligence to not take a shotgun approach and just try to fire at everything, and really hone in on the ones that I have true conviction for. But I think, I love what you're doing with your website, where you're like giving people a lot of data so they can do their research and make it more digestible, because to get all this data that I'm seeing on your website would take forever. I mean, and there's projects that I actually don't even know about that I'm going to now look at. So it's a great resource.
Yeah, I think we're up to I don't know what the total is now, 240-ish or something like that. And what's funny, so there was a report that came out that said there were something like 1,600 DePIN projects. I have a very specific definition of DePIN, so you only see a couple hundred in my database. So just be aware, not everything fits into my DePIN definition.
It's become very broad. I've seen people like tweeting out about projects that they say are deep, and I'm like, that's like a layer 1 blockchain. I don't understand. That's a DePIN project. Like, what's going on here?
But it's for DePIN.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
everything needs to connect to the network, and it's all distributed. So technically, there's someone at IoTex that I know I'm just saying that's one of the arguments that made. That's not what I'm saying.
No, I'm not saying it either. But there's people that argue that Bitcoin is a DePIN because it's a decentralized infrastructure network providing a service. It's providing security to the network. That's technically a DePIN if you use that broad definition.
Yeah.
So all proof of work projects
are technically
Bitcoin, Chia, like all of them are basically DePINs if you use that definition.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, by definition, it's just gotten so loose. And now you got the RWA side of things too, and it's like, and those are getting like crossed over. It's getting really crowded. It's interesting. Yeah. And there's new ones popping up all the time. So you kind of got to sift through and figure out, or make your best educated guess as to which ones are going to be the best. But we align. I mean, the fact that, if you're talking to someone else that does a lot of research and you have certain projects you align on, you're like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But stuff where, I don't know, what's the one where you put like a sensor on your water faucet and get
AquaSave.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that one very much, but I'm sure water quality is really important.
Well, there's two things with the there's two, I think, with water quality, if anyone's interested. AquaSave, which is actually not about water quality, or it's about saving water. Because I don't know if you guys have gas water heater tanks. It takes a few minutes for your water to get hot. And so you can actually install now little devices under your sink that are basically electric that heat your water immediately, so you don't have to wait for your tank to catch up, right? And so you don't waste that water waiting for water to get hot. It's instantaneously hot. They sell these as like conservation things all over the place. That's been around forever.
Yeah.
What AquaSave does is they have that machine which heats your water instantly, so it saves water, but then it takes that water flow data, and that's apparently valuable to somebody. I don't know, but
that's the question, right?
Valuable to somebody, and then that's how they generate their revenue, right? Is basically selling that information about your water system in your house.
Yeah.
Which maybe somebody's interested in that. I don't know.
That's the question I always have with these, like, who's buying the data? That's what I always want to know. Like, who is buying the data? Is the market there for that data? Because then
full disclosure, I did participate in the pre-sale for AquaSave. They messed it up and I had to refund everybody, but eventually.
Oh, nice.
Gotcha.
I think it's one thing is the device itself, just like preheating your water. Again, you can just buy that device now without any cryptocurrency involved. It's just good for your house. In general, and you're going to save water and energy, and so you probably get payback eventually. It may be a long time, but like putting solar panels, right? You're going to get payback from that if you do it. But in this way, you're also going to earn kind of token. So maybe it's worthwhile.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, we've been going for almost an hour and a half
Oh.
here.
Oh yeah, we went
Yeah.
long.
I try not to cut anyone short and give everyone time, but I went to eye doctor yesterday, and whatever they did, the light is killing me right now. So this one's been a little bit of a struggle. But Michael, thank you for coming on. This has been excellent as always. I'm sure you'll be back in the future.
Anytime. And if you want to feed me some information, feel free. I'm happy to update the site when permits, time permits, and money permits. I make updates to do that. But I really appreciate you guys joining and having a great conversation and having me on.
For sure. We'll upload some data to get a part of that 1% of your token that we're.
Oh yeah.
No, man, this has been awesome.
All right, to everyone in the audience, thank you for being here and watching, participating through comments. We greatly appreciate it as always. Everyone, have a great rest of your day.
All right.
Yo.
Yeah.